I am thrilled to be able to introduce Kamala D. Harris. Kamala Harris was born in Berkeley, California in 1964 amid the civil rights movement to activist parents. And she was raised in the foment of systemic changes brought by the significance of those times in American history and in world history. Kamala Harris graduated from Howard University in our nation's capital and returned to San Francisco to gain her degree in law from the University of California Bolt Hall College of Law, just across the street from our city hall. In her career as a public servant, she has taken the oath of office on many occasions. That oath says, "I do solemnly swear or affirm that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, and that I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same, and I take this obligation freely without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion, and that I will well and faithfully discharge the duties of the office about which I am about to enter." In 2004, Kamala Harris took that oath of office to become the district attorney of the city and county of San Francisco. My wife Paula and I were there as she gave that oath. Twice she took the oath of office to serve as the Attorney General of the great state of California. Paula and I were there in 2001 and 2015 when she took that oath of office. When she took the oath of office in 2017 to become the United States Senator from the great state of California, Paula and I were there. I think you know that we love to see Kamala D. Harris take oaths of office. But each time she took the oath of office, she expanded her scope of service and her responsibility to lead. So in this time when we are looking at the intersection of the history of racism and the pandemic of COVID, public service becomes even more important, and the responsibility to lead is heavily on her shoulders. And so I am overwhelmed in my opportunity to introduce to you the United States Senator from the state of California, the Honorable Kamala Devi Harris. Kamala?
Thank you, Chuck. Thank you. And I send my love and greetings to you and Paula and the children and the grandchildren. It's so great to be with everyone. And I just want to thank you for your leadership, for your friendship, and all that you do. There is so much that we have to deal with in terms of where we are as a country right now. And the reality of it is that there is a lot to be done, but we can get it done together. I want to thank also, please thank Dr. Richards for me for ending her comments to accommodate my schedule. I really do appreciate it. And I honor her work and her role of leadership. To Mayor Stephen Reed, I miss seeing you in person, but thank you for all that you are doing. And Kevin Washington, of course, of the YMCA of the United States of America, Norman Wright, and Nate Burleson. I want to thank all of you for what you are doing. So listen, I think we all know America is raw right now. America is raw. Her wounds have been exposed yet again. And we must say the names of those who are being memorialized, who are being honored, and for whom we are fighting for justice. The names, obviously, of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and Ahmaud Arbery and Rayshard Brooks, and in a long, very long list of those who have died at the hands of racism in America. And so we know that discrimination doesn't just, it is not just an issue of police brutality. Racism is not just about police brutality, it is about so many things. And we know that systemic racism and the history of racism in America seeps into every part of American life. And frankly, we also know that the truth is that America has never fully addressed its history of racism and systemic racism in our country. And that history includes the fact that for generations and centuries, Black human life has not been considered fully human. Black lives have not been valued as full lives, as important lives, as lives that should be given respect and dignity and safety. And so where we are is that we now have people marching in the streets. Yet again, as Chuck mentioned, I am the daughter of parents who were active in the civil rights movement in the 1960s. I was there marching with them in the stroller, and I have been a part of many marches since. And so what we are seeing in the streets of America today are folks who stand on the shoulders of a long history and generations of people who have been demanding justice. In fact, Chuck, I think I mentioned to you, the last public event that I did before the pandemic struck was to be in Alabama to cross the Edmund Pettus Bridge with John Lewis and so many other leaders, commemorating Bloody Sunday, which of course we call it Bloody Sunday because Black blood was shed fighting for equality, fighting for fairness, fighting for America to come to terms with whether we have any meaning to those ideals we state when we talk about equal justice under law. And so what we see today is we see the evidence of the long-standing disparities that have existed. They've been highlighted in the midst of this pandemic. And what has happened is essentially in this moment of crisis, those who are doing badly are doing even worse. And it has put a spotlight again on the history of systemic racism that has led to racial disparities across all lines, be it the educational system, be it the healthcare delivery system, be it our system of allowing people to accumulate wealth and economic well-being, be it what we are doing to train a workforce and to pay attention to the need for all people to have the skills and the jobs that allow them to be productive and allow them to feed their families and keep a roof over their head. Long-standing disparities around housing. And then, of course, when we talk about the issue of healthcare and police brutality and access to capital, access to broadband, all of this has been highlighted during the course of this pandemic. And then we all know the statistics. Black people have more student debt than their white counterparts. Median Black household income is 59 cents to the dollar as compared to median white household income. Black unemployment, in terms of the rate of Black unemployment, is twice as much as white unemployment, and the pandemic has made things even worse. Since the pandemic, 50% of Black workers have become unemployed. 50% of Black workers have become unemployed since the pandemic. And then we can look at the issue of home ownership. There's a significant gap, of course, in home ownership between Black and white families. The gap has increased from 28% in 2010 to 30% in 2017. So we're seeing an increase there. From 2010 to 2018, Black folks had remained 1.5 times more likely to not have health insurance than other families. And then, of course, the rate at which Black Americans have been killed by the police is about 2.5 times the rate for white Americans. And when you look at minority-owned businesses, something that so many of the leaders on this call have always supported and pushed for, I've seen in the bills that we have been passing in Congress that are supposed to bring relief, including relief to small businesses, the way that I'm tracking it, it looks like 90% of minority and women-owned small businesses are not going to get the benefit of the PPP. Why, one asks? Well, it doesn't require much creativity to figure it out. These businesses are often not banked with the big banks, don't have a line of credit, aren't on a first name basis with their banker, or working with community banks and CDFIs, and those financial institutions have not been locked into the systems where the SBA immediately works with them to help their clients and the clients of the community banks. And so there's work to be done. There's work to be done in terms of the death rates when we're looking at COVID-19. Right now, we are seeing that Black Americans are dying at nearly 2.5 times the rate of other folks. And so all of this to say, the data is pretty clear and really not in dispute. We have a lot to deal with, and we need to deal with these issues now, and we cannot have patience in waiting for some folks to come to terms with America's history and America's present. We as leaders are going to have to push for it. But I will tell you that I come at this with a great deal of optimism and hope. I've been out there marching with folks these last few months, couple months, and what I'm seeing in the streets is I'm seeing folks of every race, every ethnicity, age, gender, in all the 50 states, people who seemingly have nothing in common, coming together around a collective fight for justice for all people in America. And I do feel a sense of optimism that we have the potential right now, the opportunity right now to come at least a couple steps closer to that ideal that we've not yet reached but hold dear of equal justice under law. And so I'll just offer you a couple of solutions that I see at hand, and then I'm going to close my remarks. On the issue of police brutality, I actually just finished another meeting with my fellow members of the Congressional Black Caucus. We are, and Cory Booker, the senator from New Jersey, and I on the Senate side, and together with a majority of our Democratic colleagues, put forward the Justice and Policing Act. It has now come out of the House in a bipartisan way. And it is now the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act, and it'll do a number of things on the issue of police brutality. And it is very specific and actually narrowly tailored to address the need for accountability and consequence for police officers who break the rules and break the law. And as many of you know, my background includes being a career prosecutor. And the term consequence and accountability is a term that is often, almost always used in connection with the person who was arrested. And that term is almost never used in the context of the system itself and the players within the system. So what we're trying to do is deal with that and say that there should be accountability and consequence across the board. So specifically, what we are pushing for is real, meaningful change around instituting pattern and practice investigations where there is an allegation of discrimination against a law enforcement agency. I did those pattern and practice, I brought them when I was Attorney General of California. We need to have independent investigations of police misconduct. So it's not the DA's office who's dealing with that police department every day who's doing it, because there's going to be at least an appearance of conflict, if not actual conflict. Instead, there should be an independent agency. We are saying that there should be a ban on chokeholds and carotid holds. George Floyd would be alive today if there had been that ban. We are saying there should be a ban on no-knock warrants in drug cases. Breonna Taylor would be alive today if there was such a ban. We are saying there should be a national standard on the use of police force, meaning this: in most jurisdictions, when there's an allegation of use of excessive force, the question that is asked is, was that use of force reasonable? Well, as we all know, you can reason away just about anything. The more fair and just question is to ask, was that use of force necessary? These are the reforms we're offering, and I welcome all the leaders on this call to push for your representatives in Congress of whatever their political affiliation to support this, because it literally is about accountability and consequence for what can end up being lethal outcomes. We are pushing with Ayanna Pressley, the Congresswoman from Massachusetts. I have a bill called Save Our Street, where we're focused on small businesses, and in particularly minority-owned businesses, women-owned businesses, understanding that they did not get the relief from the PPP in large measure. They did not get the relief. And so let's look at the fact that so many of our small businesses, our Black-owned businesses, they're demographically, they're usually 10 or fewer employees. So what Congresswoman Pressley and I are offering is that there would be a carve-out in the next relief bill that would be $125 billion specifically for small businesses that have 10 and fewer employees, which again are the majority of minority and women-owned businesses. We are saying that and that's about access to capital, obviously. In terms of the disparities and health disparities around COVID-19, I'm pushing for what I've called the Racial and Ethnic Disparities Task Force Act, together with Robin Kelly of Illinois. And it would do exactly what it says, collect the data, because remember, everyone, that we are still not in any way on top of this virus. My home state of California is seeing the numbers go up across the country right now, just as we speak. And so we need to make sure that the limited resources are going to the places that most need them. And we need to therefore track where that is by acquiring and then relying on the data to tell us where the resources need to go, and include factors such as race in collecting that information. Because here's my concern. Not only is it about where the PPE is going to go, where are the tests going to go, but God willing, in relatively short order, we will have a vaccine. And what we all know is that vaccine is not going to be in massive production immediately in a country of 330 million people. And so we want to make sure that the vaccine is going where it is needed, as opposed to where people have access to power and to a healthcare system because they can afford to have access to that healthcare system. So that's really important, and I would encourage everyone to join the course on that. And then let's look at the issue of voting. So we know about the history of this, 1965 Voting Rights Act, and all that came before that, Bloody Sunday and the Edmund Pettus Bridge. But I'm going to go to just more recent history. I'm going to go to 2013, when the United States Supreme Court gutted the Voting Rights Act, and immediately thereafter, almost 24 states through their state legislature implemented laws that were designed to prevent folks from voting, in particular Black voters, students, Native Americans. And so much so that in North Carolina, for example, a court of appeal reviewed the law that was passed in that state and found it to have been written with, quote, surgical precision to prevent folks from voting. So we have the classic voter suppression. We also have, I serve on the Senate Intelligence Committee, what we learned and now know and have studied about the election in 2016, which is that Russia interfered in that election. And they targeted Black voters because they understood that there would be a vulnerability there based on a righteous distrust of a system that historically has never supported their right to vote, right? And so they engaged in a misinformation campaign targeting Black voters, among others, and which had the end result of suppressing the vote, because basically people were like, I don't have time for that mess. I got to go pick up the kids. I'm not going to mess with that. That's voter suppression. That's not going to go away. You can read public accounts. You can listen to the director of the FBI and others. What happened in 2016 is going to happen in 2020 around a misinformation campaign to dissuade and therefore suppress the vote. And then on top of classic voter suppression, foreign interference, we're in the midst of a pandemic. So we saw what happened in Wisconsin, which is the vote was forced to happen, and people stood in line for 2 and 3 hours. And the last number I saw, at least 50 people were tested then positive for COVID-19, including poll workers. So part of the solution here is I'm offering what we call the Vote Safe Act that would give states federal money as an incentive to have them who don't institute vote by mail, to do early voting, and for those who have to go to the polls to make sure that they have safe voting. So have things like curbside voting, and also that states put in place standard wait times. So instead of folks waiting 2 and 3 hours to stand in line, which of course increases their potential exposure to the virus, that there would be a standard wait time of X number of minutes, and then the states would put the resources into ensuring that the polling places accommodate that standard. So these are some of the areas that we're working on. And then I'll just close by also mentioning the 2020 census. There's so much that the YMCA does that is reliant on accurate information about who is in the community and therefore in need of your services. And in the midst of this virus and this pandemic, in the midst of the kind of hate rhetoric that we've seen, the rhetoric against immigrants, and the fear that all of these things are causing, I am very concerned that people will be reluctant to be counted. And so we want to make sure we are getting information out, because why? We do the census only once every 10 years. And it is on the basis of that count that the federal government makes decisions about what money is going to go to states for things like Head Start, for things like Medicare and Medicaid, and public schools. So the census is obviously very important, and this census is critically important. And my last point then is thank you, YMCA. Chuck Collins, you and I have been working together for years and years. The work that is happening in San Francisco, the work that is happening around the country, is the work of an organization that has earned the trust of community, that works within the community, that takes advantage of the power and the leadership of those communities to integrate it into all that you do with a mission of service and support and uplifting and giving folks dignity. And so I just want to thank you. I know these are rough times for all of our nonprofits, the YMCA included. And so thank you all for just pushing through during these difficult times. The work you do is so important. And as individuals, I'll say to you that you are doing work on behalf of people that you may never meet, people that may never know your name, but are forever benefited because of the work you do. So I want to thank everybody, and thank you for the honor of asking me to be a part of this afternoon's presentation.
Well, thank you, Senator Harris. You know, in public, I must use your designation as senator. And also, I want to just, again, thank you for the years of your service, and also for the expansion of your service from city to nation. You gave us a lot of clues about a plan. And one of the things that many of us are deeply concerned about, and I think that the urgent cries of young people, not only in the United States, but their voices are now being heard around the world.
Yes.
In other great times in history, in significant moments in history, we have had a plan that has really been articulated from a leadership position. How do you look at really articulating a plan that will really capture the imagination and hopes and dreams of young people in a future-focused way, that they will be inspired to take the next steps in their generation?
Well, part of it is when we're talking about young leaders, we have to do a much better job of listening to them and letting them lead, as opposed to telling them how they should lead. That is critically important. Part of what we have seen happening in the streets is that there has been this organic movement, and we should never stand in its way. We should never talk about what is the proper or improper way to approach a fight for justice, a fight for civil rights, a fight for equality, a fight for the ideals of our country. So that's part of it in terms of the method of our engagement. I'd also say that it is about looking at this moment, and in particular when we're talking about the issue of race and racial disparities, we have to have a comprehensive approach, right? So part of it is the Justice and Policing Act around accountability, but a much bigger part of it, frankly, is what we need to do to reimagine public safety in America. And understand, and I say this as a former prosecutor, you know how you achieve safe communities? You invest in the health of those communities. So what am I talking about? You can go to any neighborhood in upper middle class suburbia, and you will not see police cars roaming those streets like you see in other communities. But what you will see is you will see well-funded schools. What you will see are families that have an income and jobs that allow them to get through the end of the month without worrying about whether they're going to put food on the table or keep a roof over their head. What you will see are high rates of home ownership. What you will see are folks who have access to health care because they can afford it, and access to mental health care. What you will see are small businesses that have access to capital. These are the attributes of a healthy community, and those communities are then safe communities. So part of this discussion has to be to do what the YMCA does, right? Which is invest in the health and well-being of communities. Understanding that's just the smarter way to approach it, especially when you know in many cities, 1/3 of the entire city budget is spent on policing. And that's just, you can't only do that if you actually want safe communities. You have to invest in the health of those communities. And that has to be part of the discussion. I'll also just say this, because you've talked about the intersection between race and this COVID pandemic. I also think of this pandemic as having been, as it turns out, an accelerator. So by that, I mean, racial disparities, pre-existing conditions. Black folks 20% more likely to have asthma, 40% more likely to have high blood pressure. Black women 3 times more likely to have lupus, which is an autoimmune disease, right? And what this virus is it's a predator, and it preys in particular on people with pre-existing conditions. So that's part of why we've seen the racial disparities in terms of the death count, right? And so what this virus has done in many ways, this pandemic, is it has accelerated, it has highlighted, it has put a huge microscope on the problems that existed before the pandemic hit. It has accelerated another issue. Before the pandemic, I would talk about the fact that over the next 10 years to 15 years, it is likely that 40% of the jobs that currently exist will no longer exist. Well, now we have over 45 million people who just in the last 100 days have lost their jobs. I haven't seen an estimate yet, but I am betting you that there's going to be a significant number of those for whom the jobs will just not exist anymore as we go forward. So it has accelerated that issue, which then provides us an opportunity when we talk about the future and how we grow our country and include our young leaders. Let's invest, let's have a Marshall Plan for investing in America's workforce and the education of America's workforce. And again, that's where you do such a great job in terms of the YMCA and its culture and the service it provides. So these are the things we have to be talking about. But I do believe to help the young leaders as allies, for those of us who are not in that category, let's stand side by side with them and remind each other, all of us, of the opportunities that are present in this moment of crisis, because any good fight is born out of optimism. It's born out of knowing what can be unburdened by what has been.
Well, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
I want to also thank you again for being our congressional champion this year. Senator Harris was among the most important members of Congress that we, on an annual basis, award our congressional champion. And for the shoulders that you represent and the responsibilities of government to the people, Kamala D. Harris, it is our great pleasure to have had you address us in this keynote.
Thank you. It's my honor. And thank you all, everybody, for the work you do. Thank you.